Welcome back, one and all, to Drunk on Writing Stephen King Dissection Series, brought to you in part through the patronage of Ariya Norinth. Last time, we really dug into Stephen King's 1982 novella, The Body. Well, today, we're taking a look at its 1986 adaptation, Stand By Me, directed by Rob Reiner, best known at that time for his role on All in the Family, though delving into his rather admirable directorial run, including This Is Spinal Tap, The Princess Bride, and When Harry Met Sally, as well as another King novel we'll talk about soon. And starring, well, a few kids you probably know. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to see more, please be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that little bell so you always get the notifications. I know YouTube is kind of notorious for sometimes hiding notifications. Is a little annoying. You can even listen to the Drunk on Writing Dissections as a podcast if you're more audibly inclined. I tend to really like options. And if you just want more videos more often, head on over to drunkonwriting.com where you can sign up for all sorts of fun stuff. Now, Stand By Me. Actually, before we go into anything else, we have to talk about the title, right? Stand By Me, because it's obviously not The Body. They changed it up. We need to talk about the why there. Why we seemingly have this Ben E. King homage. Well, according to screenwriter Reynold Gideon, the novella's title, The Body, sounded like either a sex film, a bodybuilding film, or another Stephen King horror film. Rob Reiner came up with Stand By Me, and it ended up being the least unpopular option. All well and good. I mean, that's fine. It's a fine title, I think. I think it kind of goes into the themes of the film rather nicely. However, the movie's meant to take place in 1959. Stand By Me, the song, didn't release until 1961, which is why, though the score borrows heavily from the melody, the song's not actually in the movie. Well, until the credits anyway. But the film did remind everybody just how fantastic the song is, and it ended up in the Billboard Top 100. I think it necked out at like number 9 or so. So yeah, Stand By Me. I can see their point about the body bit. It does kind of sound like it could be a sex film. Now, where was I going originally? Right. Stand By Me has the distinction of being the very first novella within this collection to be adapted to film. The Shawshank Redemption wouldn't release until 1994, and Apt Pupil not until 1998, with an adaptation of The Breathing Method, the final novella in the collection, still just an announcement. And while with a $52.3 million box office, the movie may not have made the most money of the bunch. That would actually be Shawshank Redemption, though with only about an $8 million budget, I think it was the most profitable of the bunch. Either way, it's certainly one of the best of the three. I would hesitate to say that it's probably the second best, although I think it depends on your mood whether it's Shawshank or Stand By Me. I think it might be one of the most written about, one of the most covered, and it's absolutely, I think it's probably the most loved generally. Even if Shawshank might eke out, and maybe some people think it's better, I think some people probably love Stand By Me more. In fact, there's this great anecdote when Stephen King was given. He was shown the movie for the first time. He had to take a few minutes. He took a few minutes. He said, "Rob, I need a few minutes." He went outside and kind of collected himself, and he came back and he said, "That is the best adaptation of anything that I've written to date." I love that. Rob Reiner's gone on to say that he thinks it's the best movie that he's made today. I think this was a couple years ago he said that. So, I mean, he's still got some years left to him, but the best adaptation? I don't know. I don't think I 100% agree.
Here's Johnny.
But it's up there, and I think King's love might stem from the fact that Stand By Me may be one of the most faithful adaptations of his works, and almost certainly was the most faithful at that point in time. Though there is one significant difference between the novella and the film. While the book is told by Gordy, it's very much an ensemble piece, right? All these kids kind of have their moments to shine. Gordy kind of acts as the narrator, and it is his story as, he's recounting the tale because he's the writer. But he's not the hero necessarily. Chris almost seems to be the hero in a lot of ways. But the film changes that up. We get Gordy front and center. Though, while significant, in my opinion, it kind of hardly really registers, and it's really only if you think hard about it that it really comes out. Other than making Gordy the one who grabs the gun in the climax, changing his role up a bit with Chris, who grabs it in the novella, which, for both of them, is rather significant character development, even if it comes at the end of the movie. And, of course, obviously framing the whole thing with Richard Dreyfuss at the beginning, kind of sitting in the car and thinking about stuff, and then he starts in on his narration. Although, if you look not too closely, that opening shot does not look like Dreyfuss, right? Because that's not Richard Dreyfuss. That's David Dukes, who was originally cast in the role, but apparently the tone of his narration, the emotional feeling of his narration, didn't quite fit what Rob Reiner ended up wanting to go with, so they tried again, and Dreyfuss, who'd known Reiner since they were kids, he came in and was apparently exactly what Reiner wanted, and they ended up refilming those scenes. Shifting the narration to focus more on Gordy was Rob Reiner's idea, who said in that Stand By Me documentary I mentioned last time, Walking the Tracks, the summer of Stand By Me, I found my own way into it through my own personal experience and said, Gordy has to be the main character. It's all about a little boy who doesn't feel good about himself, who's looking for approval, can't get it from his father, and looks to his friends to be bolstered and find that approval and feel good about himself. And once I hit up on that, I said, okay, I can tell the story, because these are feelings I had felt as a young kid growing up and trying to make my way in the world. Rob Reiner is, of course, the son of Carl Reiner, best known as the creator, producer, writer, and actor on the Dick Van Dyke Show. The two apparently had something of a difficult relationship, though I think a lot of that kind of stems from just trying to live up to the name. As Rob continued in the documentary, I was always looking for approval from my father and always felt that I wasn't really seen by him. So I gained a lot of strength from my friends. Reiner expanded on his Stand By Me thoughts in an interview he did with The Telegraph, saying, in the book it was about 4 boys. But after about 5 days of driving around, I realized this was really Gordy's story. In the book, Gordy was kind of a dispassionate observer. But once I made Gordy the central focus of the piece, then it made sense to me. Through the experience of going to find the dead body and his friendship with these boys, he began to feel empowered and went on to become a very successful writer. He basically became Stephen King. This, of course, goes into the autobiographical nature of the film, of the story that I mentioned last time, so we're not going to get back into that. Well, we'll probably get back into it in a little bit, but not just right now, because, interestingly, Reiner was not the first director lined up for the adaptation. That honor goes to Adrian Lyne, director of Flashdance, Fatal Attraction, Jacob's Ladder, and many more just fantastic classic films. In fact, he'd just come off filming 9.5 weeks, and had promised himself something of a vacation after that film's production, which, of course, ran over schedule, so timing didn't quite work out for him. Except it kind of did work out for the film and the rest of the production crew, because Lyne's director salary was apparently a bit high. Writers and producers Bruce A. Evans and Reynold Gideon, who negotiated the film rights with King for $100,000 and 10% of gross profits, which, by the way, they did a piss poor job of negotiating. I mean, that's a sweet deal. I would take that deal any day of the week. Yes, please, 10% of gross profits? Okay, thank you very much. Take my book, make a film, go away, I would love that. But those two had to cut their share of the profits in half to ensure that Line came on. So while I'm sure Line would have been excellent. Reiner, given he was at the kind of start of his directorial career, probably came in with a much lower cost. And, I mean, you gotta hand it to him, right? I mean, this movie worked out. It's great. And I think a lot of that had to do with the casting. But before we get to that, replacing line wasn't the only obstacle that Stand By Me had to overcome to get before us. Just before shooting, Embassy Pictures, which was set to produce and distribute the film, was sold to Columbia Pictures, which wanted to just straight up cancel the production. But Norman Lear, one of Embassy's co-owners, but more importantly, developer of All in the Family, gave $7.5 million of his own money to ensure the film got made. It's nice to know millionaires sometimes. And over on the back end, Columbia Pictures production head Guy McElwain was convinced to distribute Stand By Me based on his daughter's reaction to his film screening. Gotta love kids. They know what they love. Speaking of kids, they ended up interviewing more than 70 kids out of about 300 who auditioned, including some very, very big names came in to try to read for these parts. And I'm not going to go into it because it's just a laundry list. A lot of them that you would recognize, people that you figure would be around there. And they wound up with just 4 kids who, they basically were Gordy and Teddy and Vern and Chris, which was by design. When you're casting 12 and 13-year-old boys, said Reiner, you really have to cast close to their personalities. You can't ask kids of that age to go very far from who they are, because they don't have the craft yet. They're not developed yet. Actually, Will Wheaton, who ended up playing Gordy in the film, young Gordy in the film, summed this up rather well in a 2011 interview with NPR. He said, Rob Reiner found 4 young boys who basically were the characters we played. I was awkward and nerdy and shy and uncomfortable in my own skin and really, really sensitive. And River Phoenix was cool and really smart and passionate, and even at that age, kind of like a father figure to some of us. Jerry O'Connell was one of the funniest people I had ever seen in my life, either before or since. And Corey Feldman was unbelievably angry and in an incredible amount of pain and had an absolutely terrible relationship with his parents. Of course, it helped that instead of filming right off, Reiner had the 4 kids take 2 weeks to do theater games based on Viola Spolin's improvisation for the theater. Trust exercises and improv games like mirroring each other and guiding each other around the hotel lobby that they were staying in, guiding them around blindfolded, things like that. Not just to be better actors per se, but to get the kids comfortable with each other, to build camaraderie, to build friendships. It actually worked so well. They ended up getting into all sorts of mischief at that hotel. Like they threw all of the furniture around the pool into the pool, caused all sorts of. That's just one anecdote. I think Will Wheaton ended up hacking the video game so that they could play for free all the time. Good job, Rob. You were very successful in making them friends, and I gotta say, I think it was this friendship, this closeness, really coming off on film that, when I watched Stand By Me as a kid, along with the likes of the Goonies and probably, Indiana Jones, it really just made me wonder what sort of fun little mischief and hidden treasures were buried around my town. And while, I don't think there were many buried treasures around in Bridgeport, there was plenty of mischief to be had. So, nothing quite like in this film, but, stepping back, I think the closeness on the film really, because of it, the film is absolutely strengthening. We get several long uncut shots demonstrating just how well the kids all work together. Like the one immediately following Corey Feldman's brilliant dump scene. Feldman, by the way, I think he was probably the most well-known of all of the actors here, all the child actors. He had just done Goonies the year before, and he had a few appearances in the Friday the 13th films, and Gremlins, of course, just to name a few. But even with the others, we get some perfect line delivery, especially from O'Connell, who was making his film debut.
You guys want to go see a dead body?
Some incredibly realistic back and forths, like the milk money conversation between Gordy and Chris, which, by the way, we got only because Reiner told River Phoenix to think about a time that an adult really let him down and focus on that while filming the scene. Let that, percolate around in his brain as he was filming. And that shot is the one that ended up in the film. In fact, River was so distraught and so upset about whatever he was thinking about that after the scene he was still crying. He was so messed up that Rob Reiner ended up going over and comforting him. It's kind of touching. And so yeah, we do get example after example in this film of pure, unadulterated, raw emotion, including my favorite.
Train!
Yeah, the train. I know I used that clip last time, but there's just something so special about it. The way just Will Wheaton scream here, how it's kind of slowed down and emphasized, and it's just it's just so good. It comes after we've already seen an attempted train dodge from Teddy. That's in the book as well, but here it's handled much better, far more naturally. And while the main train scene avoids all of the, let's call them grim details I mentioned last time, seeing the kids react here, you really feel for them. You're terrified for them. Even though like watching it this last time, I kept wondering something. Why the hell wasn't the conductor slowing the train down? Like, he obviously sees it. There's this one part where you kind of cut in and you see the conductor looking out and honking the horn and pulling the cord to honk the horn. Why wasn't he slowing down? I mean, you could try at least to slow down. It looked like he was almost gunning for the kids, right? I assume it's a he at this point in time. It kind of looked like a he in the movie, but slow down. Try to do something. What was it okay to just plow down the kids if they're just crossing the tracks? I mean, you got to at least put some kind of effort. It's not like, it was like 100-car freight train that would have been impossible to slow down. I mean, this thing was barely much more than an engine. I mean, are you kidding me? I almost feel like if we really zoomed in on there, if we really got in there and looked at the conductor, it'd be like Pennywise sitting there laughing his butt off as Gordy and Vern run for their lives, just absolutely terrified. That's a reference to the book that we have yet to cover, but you probably know it, so it's still a bit ridiculous. Now, while much of the film was shot in Oregon, including in 50s like Brownsville, which to this day holds an annual Stand By Me Day, rather than Maine, possibly because someone mistook a reference to Portland, the train scene was filmed in California. More specifically, an 80-foot high trestle on the McCloud River railroad line over Lake Britain Reservoir. And while the kids look terrified, it's really only if you squint your eyes and ignore the 1986 level of special effects that it even comes close to looking like they're actually in danger. But they never really were. Now, some movie history here. Stand By Me was filmed just a few years after this notoriously horrific accident on the set of Twilight Zone, the movie, in which Vic Morrow and 2 child actors were killed by a crashing helicopter. So needless to say, restrictions were a bit tighter than they were just even a few years prior, which is why the kids had stunt doubles in the scene. They also had plywood laid down across the ties, and they even made use of a telephoto lens to make the train MCRR-25, which is surprisingly still in daily operation, though not across this particular trestle, which no longer has tracks running across it, look closer than it actually was. Funny enough, the fact that the kids weren't scared was really messing up the filming, because despite those improv games, despite rehearsal, despite all of this effort going into the kids, because the train wasn't actually there, the kids weren't scared until this particular take that they have in the film, when they weren't so much scared of the train as they were scared of Rob Reiner, as the director kind of noted in that documentary. We had a dolly track set up where the dolly grips were pulling this camera, trying to keep up with them running, and it was hard. The train was so far behind them, there was no real danger that anything would happen to them. So when we had a close-up of them, when they were running, I wanted them to be terrified and crying, and when we shot it, they just weren't doing it. Finally, I said to them, "You two, these men are tired. They don't want to push this camera anymore. They're tired. And the reason they have to keep pushing it is because of you. If you're not going to cry because you're worried about that train coming after you, you better start crying because I'm going to come after you." And then they started crying and I said, "Roll the camera." So this scene looks and feels so real, so visceral, because the emotion is real and visceral and it's just raw. Like, there are so many stories behind some of the scenes in this film, so many similar stories, that it's surprising that a film could get made like this and not cause like permanent harm to some actors like this. I mean, maybe it did. I don't know. I don't want to say, but we can't go into every single scene. Otherwise this episode would be longer than the movie itself. But there are a few that I feel like we need to talk about. The first, because, well, I sort of kind of glossed over it last time, and, well, I just kind of really love it. Particularly the changes that they made from the book. Yeah, we're talking the Leeches. In the body, the novella, the kids are walking the tracks, right? They don't deviate from the tracks. They continue to walk the tracks the entire time. And there's a kind of a main story beat here that it's hot. The kids are sweating. It's just like 100 degrees. I'm being hyperbolic. I don't think it's actually that hot. But toward the end, they're walking the tracks and they see this clear and shining pool of water brilliantly mirroring the sunlight, as Stephen King writes. And it's built up around these beaver dams that are kind of underneath the train tracks. And they're so hot and this water looks so cool that they jump in, because why wouldn't you jump in? I mean, it's just brilliant. It's just, it looks so refreshing. And they've been walking these tracks for so long. This is a nice little treat. Of course, you know how this ends up, because the movie version is pretty much, it's very, very similar. It comes to the same conclusion, if something of a different route to get there. In the film, the kids actually try a shortcut through the water, and they don't mean to actually go swimming, which plays perfectly with the whole comedic tone of the film. The way they just kind of fall in, the one-liners, again, like Vern's.
Told you I should have stuck to the tracks.
Love that line. Even the way they finally spot the Leeches while wrestling, this is great stuff. And of course, it's all topped off with the mother of all feints. What's interesting here, I think the water was supposed to be cleaner looking. I mean, what they use in the film is a man-made pool. Unfortunately, they dug it in June in the middle of a forest and didn't actually film in the spot until August. So there are a few summer months wherein they just kind of let this pool hang out in the middle of a forest, and when they got back to it, it was basically an actual swamp. Still, the kids were fine. The leeches were all fake, just molded latex and rubber cement. I think the most that they really had to deal with was a little bit of skin irritation. Also fake, all the vomit in the phenomenal lard ass segment, which is one of the few hints we have in the film of Gordy's writing potential. As I mentioned in the last episode, Stand By Me isn't as much a writer's memoir as the novella. It's much more the story of the journey, but Rob Reiner opted to include this sort of narrative cutaway. But he agonized over it because he was trying to figure out how a 12-year-old writer, a 12-year-old possibly Stephen King, would tell this story. It wouldn't be too horrific. It wouldn't even be all that detailed. But I think the over-the-top, cartoonish nature of the whole thing worked perfectly. And especially, if you look at it sort of like from the king timeline, as some looking at it as would a 12-year-old king actually tell a story this way? Well, I think if you think back on something like Creep Show, I think it works. I think that works, right? Creep Show is a weird one, kind of cartoonish, right? Very cartoonish. I mean, if you look at the comic books. Anyways, let's get back to it. A local bakery supplying all those blueberry pies, along with extra filling that was used to simulate the vomit. It was mixed with large curd cottage cheese, which just, oh my god, I hated cottage cheese before. Now you're telling me they're using it to simulate vomit in movies. Great, that's just great. Actually, you know what? No, I have to go back because it is important that this whole scene is included in the film. I mean, we don't get the other narrative cutaway to a book excerpt from Gordy, right? This is the one that we get. And we don't see Richard Dreyfuss writing throughout the film. I mean, we don't get him really talking about his writing career. It's really only at the very end that we see him do anything writing related. I mean, he could have just been talking about this the rest of the story to somebody in a bar. He could have been talking it out loud in his car. He could have just been thinking it. It might not have been writing it. The writer's life aspect of this story, how these events truly pushed Gordy to become this prolific writer, all that is lost in this film adaptation. Though, to be fair, the Barfarama scene and Chris telling Gordy he can make it as a writer, they're powerful inclusions. I don't want to take away from those. Something else sort of lost in translation that's still present in the film, especially in this lard ass scene, the undercurrent of a battle between kids and adults. I mean, it's not really an undercurrent in this scene. I mean, it's clear as day, right? With the 12-year-old lard ass, excuse me, I should probably stop calling him lard ass, David Hogan doing literal battle against adults and seemingly coming out on top. And we do get the slightly watered down junkyard scene, that milk money scene, of course, and everything involving the kids' parents. They're just awful people. But we don't get the grocer scene. Yes, that scene is in the film, but crucially, there's one point missing where the grocer puts his thumb down on the scale to kind of screw Gordy over. He's trying to overcharge him on the meat, or say that there's more meat there than there actually is. And then he does it again when he's ringing up at the register. He tries to overcharge Gordy, and he gets mad at Gordy when he does the math right and calls him on it. He's like all upset, and he's just like, what a punk little kid you are. We don't get any of that. And we don't get any of the balancing adults either. The ones who sort of help the kids out, especially toward the end of the book, like old Mrs. Chambers? I think it's Chalmers. Dr. Clarkson and Mrs. McGinn and the like. We do, however, in this film have these let's call them bridges. Bridges between the adults and the kids. Although, I think it's rather telling that one dies and the other is kind of an asshole. I'm talking about John Cusack as Gordy's deceased older brother Denny, of course, and Kiefer Sutherland's Ace. These more, I hesitate to call them bit players, but they kind of sort of are. They embody characteristics of both ends. Reiner even refers to Denny as the buffer between Gordy and his dad, and we see that. We see Denny trying to give Gordy his time to shine, which is, it's just such a lovely older brother moment, isn't it? Kind of breaks your heart a little bit. And pointedly, this is the first time that we really hear about Gordy's running, so this is a crucial scene here. But I think of these two characters, it's Sutherland's Ace who really shines in this film. He's just so mean. And funny enough, Kiefer Sutherland apparently kind of extended this and tried to help out the other kids by picking on them off camera. He tried to maintain the Ace personality so that when they were doing the scenes together, the kids would look at him and they'd be a little scared. They'd be like, well, what's he gonna do? They were kind of terrified of him. Sure, that's the reason he was picking on the kids. Yeah, okay. But if you compare Ace to the book, his character is really heavily invested in by the screenwriters. I mean, Ace is kind of he's just like this off-screen threat in the book. He really doesn't have much quote unquote screen time. But here, he's fairly developed, and he's given these great lines like,
if either one of you assholes had $2,000, I'd kill you both.
We see him absolutely dominate a game of chicken. Even the way he takes Gordy's Yankees hat, which Denny had given him, and he never gives it back. Rob Reiner says he figures Ace and Oddball just up and threw the hat out the moment they went around the corner. I mean, all of this is all superb character development. Although it is a tad odd, right? We didn't need that. We didn't need Ace to be a character. He could have been that just threat, that looming threat that was just coming, that was kind of ever present. This person who, come the third act, he's suddenly there. We didn't need him peppered throughout the film. It wasn't necessary. But I love it. I kind of love it. At the end of Stand By Me, and toward the end of The Body as well, we get these sort of looks into how the four main characters' lives played out. Other than getting their butts kicked by Ace and the gang, which the movie opted to skip over. Here's how King imagines Vern's life went, or at least the end of it. Vern Tessio was killed in a house fire that swept a Lewiston apartment building in 1966. There had been a large drunken party. Vern was there. Someone fell asleep in one of the bedrooms with a live cigarette going. Vern himself, maybe, drifting off, dreaming of his pennies. They identified him and the four others who died by their teeth. I prefer his movie fate, and I would think that he would too.
I heard that Vern got married out of high school, had 4 kids, and is now the forklift operator at the Arsenault lumber yard.
Teddy's fate was also pretty grim in the book. Teddy went in a squalid car crash. That was 1971, I think, or maybe it was early 1972. Teddy's Bel Air was full of his friends, and they were passing around a couple of joints and a couple of bottles of Pop-Off. They hit a utility pole and sheared it off, and the Chevrolet rolled 6 times. Though it's not much better in the film.
Teddy tried several times to get into the army, but his eyes and his ear kept him out. Last I'd heard, he'd spent some time in jail and was now doing odd jobs around Castle Rock.
Chris has a more involved ending in the novella. It's far more like what we see in the film adaptation. He enrolled in the college classes in his high school, was accepted along with Gordy to the University of Maine, where he studied pre-law. And then, well, though it happens seemingly much earlier in the novella, you know what happens. Near the end of 1971, Chris went into a Chicken Delight in Portland to get a 3-piece snack bucket. Just ahead of him, 2 men started arguing about which one had been first in line. One of them pulled the knife. Chris, who had always been the best of us at making peace, stepped between them and was stabbed in the throat. He died almost instantly. Here's how Richard Dreyfuss puts it.
Chris did get out. He enrolled in the college courses with me, and although it was hard, he gutted it out like he always did. He went on to college and eventually became a lawyer. Last week, he entered a fast food restaurant. Just ahead of him, 2 men got into an argument. One of them pulled a knife. Chris, who had always made the best peace, tried to break it up. He was stabbed in the throat. He died almost instantly.
I don't know why, but that whole thing just really breaks me. I don't know if you can tell. I think you can tell. I can feel it in my voice. I was trying to hold back a little bit of tears there. I don't know. It could be my own experiences. It could be. But I think it really has more to do with what went down with River Phoenix. Of course, the actor who played Chris. You could see it in this movie, his talent. You knew he was going to be something special. And I remember even as a kid, being so in awe of his performance, not just here, but also in Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. I thought he was just phenomenal there. He'd go on to massive acclaim for his roles in 1988's Running on Empty, which earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor, and 1991's My Own Private Idaho. But my personal only other touchstone for him, for River Phoenix, was this dedication at the end of Interview with a Vampire. In memory of River Phoenix, 1970 to 1993. As tragic as Chris Chambers' death is, River Phoenix dying of a drug overdose outside of the Viper Room at the age of 23 as his girlfriend watched is, I don't have the words. It was a loss. Though some argue it's what pushed River's brother, Joaquin Phoenix, to such monumental heights as an actor, though he, of course, has his own issues, as you might expect. And it was just terrible. Just terrible. For the other kids, life went in very different directions. Jerry O'Connell, who played Vern, had quite the glow-up and married actress and former model Rebecca Romaine, with whom he has twin girls. Side note, Stand By Me is apparently Rebecca Romaine's favorite film, at least as a kid. As O'Connell explained on an episode of Live with Kelly, she had posters all around her room growing up, which was something that she didn't actually tell Jerry O'Connell. He found out from a friend of hers about 3 or 4 months into the two of them dating. So it's kind of funny. He's had all sorts of roles since Stand By Me, but his most notable may be as the lead in Joe's Apartment. To me, though, most importantly, he was Quinn Mallory in Sliders, which, gonna be honest, I'm probably gonna do a dissection on one of these days, because I love that show. Still aggravated at the ending of it, but, moving on. Actually, no. You know what? Sliders is important because Corey Feldman, who played Teddy, actually appeared in an episode. So they kind of had a reunion. And Corey Feldman, of course, followed Stand By Me with 1987's The Lost Boys, along with Kiefer Sutherland, another reunion of sorts, and Corey Haim. Fittingly, Feldman and Haim became known after this as the two Coreys. They were sort of best friends. But Corey Feldman struggled rather publicly, with drugs, which he fell into after being sexually abused as a child, and his career took something of a spiral. He was last seen in the short Parallel, but has a number of upcoming projects. Finally, Will Wheaton, Gordy. He, of course, would go on to play the much-maligned Wesley Crusher in Star Trek The Next Generation. He'd also win acclaim as Joey Trotta in 1991's Toy Soldiers. And while his spotlight has diminished a bit over the years as he's done, some more low-key projects, written a couple books, done stuff on like YouTube and online and whatnot. I mean, the guy's keeping busy. He's also a dad at this point. I honestly, I look at him and I just think of him as the king of the nerds, which honestly, I think for him, that's just perfect. This has been Drunk on Writing's dissection of Stand By Me, the 1986 adaptation of Stephen King's novella, The Body. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the channel. Please leave a comment below. Please, give me a thumbs up, whatever you feel like doing. If you really like it and would like more, head on over to drunkonwriting.com and sign up. You get plenty more videos, far more often, and a whole bunch of other little goodies that I like to pepper in here and there. Until next time, as always, cheers and keep on